All right, welcome everybody. We are recording. So again, today I want to dedicate to obviously the poor people who are going through everything in Ukraine, tragedy, and I'd also like to appeal to our hearts. And when you look at leadership, the way that President Zelensky has stood up and said, "I don't need a lift out of here. We need weapons," and just being what a true leader is. We look at Moshe. Moses is slated to be the leader of the Israelites, of the Jewish people. And if you learn the Maharal says something amazing. In order for a leader to lead people, he has to be able to relate with them. A leader has to relate with his people. Moshe, you're raised in Pharaoh's house. You're raised in the palace. How can you relate with the Israelites who are slaves? And, the Zohar says that when the Israelites were in Egypt, they weren't just shackled by their arms in slavery. Speech itself was enslaved. Because when you're a slave, you can't speak your mind freely. So the Maharal says, Moshe, how can you relate with these people? So, we all learned the story that Moshe burned his tongue. And the Maharal says that if they can't speak freely, then you can't speak freely, Moshe. If they can't talk, then you can't talk. And that's how he was able to relate to the Israelites. And the Maharal says that the moment the exodus from Egypt happened, Moshe got his full faculty of speech back. Because if you want to relate to people, if you want to lead people, you have to be able to relate with them. I've been getting a ton of questions from people. Why is this happening? Is there a reason for things like this to happen? Some people say, does this mean that we're on the precipice of the Messianic Advent? A couple things. One, I would say that it's immature to assume that any one event would be the event leading up to the Messianic time. I think that's immature. How dare you say that World War I or World War II didn't cut that? So I don't think that that's appropriate. Right? We have, whether times are good or bad, we have an obligation to believe that the Mashiach can come at any time. Just because an event is happening that's tragic is not a reason to think that it should be coming any quicker. So what I'd like to focus on today, and this will probably be a two-part class. We'll see how much we get covered, how much we're able to cover. But today, I would like to try and tackle a difficult subject of why things happen in the world. I spoke with Rabbi Gaon yesterday about this subject a bit, and I was popping some ideas off of him, and obviously he gave me his insight, which is obviously much greater than anything I can ever share with you. But anyway, that being said, I'd like to try and tackle and put into words why things happen in the world. And it's obviously an amazing and perplexing subject. And let me try and give an introduction and lay out a few of the themes. So let's start with a reference. So how would you begin to approach this subject of why things happen in the world, right? Where would you look? So let me suggest a classic place to begin, a source that I quote a lot called Derech Hashem, right? It's by one of the classic authors. We've discussed him in the past, the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was an incredible young man when he died. Right, I don't think he lived to 40, and in the second section of Derech Hashem, he deals with what's called hashgacha or hanhaga. In other words, the conduct of the world, why things happen. And the first section deals with God and the human condition, and there are 4 sections to the book, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, the second section deals with hashgacha, which means divine immanence, divine providence. And in the 3rd chapter of the second section of the book, he deals with the question of why things happen in the world. And quite astoundingly, he lists 12 reasons. And the reason I'm suggesting this as a reference for you is because there are many places that deal with hashgacha in various contexts, but here the Ramchal gives you an overview of hashgacha, of divine providence in the world, and he goes as far to list the causes. I think he makes it pretty clear that these are exhaustive causes. In other words, You can imagine the intellect and Torah knowledge that it must have taken, right? Or that it must take in order to list all the reasons why things happen in the world. All the reasons. Okay? You have to have an incredible encyclopedic cross-referencing system in your understanding of Torah to be able to list in one location all the reasons why things actually happen in the world. The Ramchal didn't have Google. So this is an incredibly, incredibly impressive human. So anyways, I highly recommend all of you buy the English translation of Derech Hashem by Feldheim. It's an unbelievable work. He died at under 40. Why do so many Kabbalists die at such a young age, Rabbi? Okay, so no one knows the answer to that question. Nobody knows why. What I can guarantee is that if you go through all 12 reasons, you'll discover the answer to that question, why things happen. However, you may not find out which one of the 12 reasons is the right one. And I'll try to explain why we don't have access to that particular insight. Why we can list the possible reasons, right? If we don't exactly know which one may apply in any given circumstance as a general rule. And I'll try to explain all of this. The reason why things happen, the reason why there's a reason that things happen, is because the world is marching toward a tachlis. The world is marching toward a purpose. The world and each individual, all of us, each individual within the world is marching toward an endpoint, which is guaranteed. Perfection of each character, perfection of the world. So both the Jewish people and all of humanity, not only all of humanity, by the way, animals as well. The biological world and the whole cosmic structure of the universe. Again, at least with the universe that we're familiar with. Other universes where God's got other things going on besides our universe is off limits to our knowledge. But the final perfection of the exercise, of this enterprise, which is, again, creation, that is guaranteed. That is guaranteed. One second, there are already a couple of comments. Yeah, for sure, Myrna. What do you mean that animals have tachlis, and are animals marching toward the same tachlis as humans? You have to remember that before the sin, animals were sentient beings. Animals were basically on the level that we're at now. We were at a much higher level. Adam was at a much higher level. And animals were, before the sin, where we are now. I don't want to get disjointed from what I'm trying to focus on today. So we could have a discussion about animals another time. But after Adam's sin, the world came crashing down. Humans came to where we are today, and animals went down to where they are today. Anyways, so everything is guaranteed, and therefore there's an agenda. There's an agenda. So history moves toward a fulfillment, right, or a showdown, in which everything will reach its perfection. The complication is free will. That's the complication. And as the Ramchal explains, the complication is that God wants the world to reach its perfection through you, through us. And therefore, it's not just a model system that he runs. It's a system that he guarantees will get a certain endpoint done by us. And since we have freedom, and by the way, of course, we need freedom of will, obviously. We're not going to discuss the concept of freedom of will right now. But our freedom of will, that gives meaning to our lives. But we're the ones who have to generate that perfection. And therefore, at the end of the day, we need to generate our own perfection and the perfection of the world itself. And again, here comes the key. Everything that happens in the world is a way of ensuring that the perfection will take place. So, again, put that in your back pocket and don't ever forget that. It's an important line. Again, I'll say it again. Everything that happens in the world is a way of ensuring that the perfection, in fact, takes place. So everything that happens in the world, why people die, why people are born, why there's good, why there's evil, why there's reward, why there's punishment, why there are nuances of reward and punishment, why some people suffer even though they never did anything wrong, why some people don't suffer in this life even though they did things which were wrong, again, each detail of every single thing that happens in the world and how it used to happen and how it happened later. The phases of history, every single thing that humans experience is a guaranteed element in bringing you and the world to its perfection. To its perfection. Can you all hear me? Can you type a yes if you can hear me?
Yeah, I can still
okay,
hear you.
Great. Okay, so it's all of you blacked out on my screen for some reason. But okay, if you can hear me, that's all that matters. But in the dynamic in how you choose to interact, that's the key. And therefore, if humans interact with the world in a certain way, there are certain things, right? Then certain things happen in the world to put the world on track. When, for example, humanity decides to take a detour from Tachlis. I'll give you a classic example. The Jewish people are leaving Egypt, and the Egyptians decide to destroy the Jewish people. They decide that they're going to pursue them. The Jewish people are marching toward their destiny. They're marching toward their destiny to receive the Torah and move toward Israel. The Egyptians decide to pervert that. What happens? At that point, what happens? A miracle. A miracle happens because history has to progress. And history requires that the Jewish people, right, for the Jewish people to stand at Mount Sinai and receive the Torah. And when anyone threatens to take that offline, there's a pushing back onto line. Okay? But it'll happen miraculously in a way where it can be seen that there is an agenda. Right? After all, the Egyptians could have been destroyed in a non-miraculous fashion. They could have been. When the Egyptians are pursuing the Jewish people, you could have had, right, what Russia just went through, right? A terrible stock crash. They could have had an Egyptian stock market collapse. Or they could have had a COVID epidemic. All sorts of natural things could have happened. Why does it have to be in the miraculous fashion of the ocean splitting, for example? To show you that there's an agenda. And that's, again, and therefore that's not acceptable. To pervert the agenda, that's never acceptable. Even when nature has to be overruled in order to demonstrate that, that's what God will do. So that's a reason for the miracles of the Exodus. And therefore, so let's understand the basic principle of the discussion. The world has an agenda, even though we may not see it, even though it's hidden from all of us, and that's for the purpose of our free will. And again, it's hidden at different levels. During prophetic eras, obviously it was less hidden. You saw more open miracles. During later eras in history, it'd be more hidden. But the reason mechanisms of history is hidden from us is so that we can have the merit of bringing it to its perfection. So let me try and say that again. The agenda is to bring the world to its perfection through human activity, not through godly activity, through human activity. And this is one of the things that Rabbi Gaon was saying yesterday. It's to bring the perfection through our involvement, through our activity, and not God's activity. And therefore, the mechanism is God sets up the world in such a way that it moves inexorably, right, guaranteed toward its final showdown. And any deviation and variation of that theme that humans introduce to the system will then push back. And that's why things happen. One of the demonstrations of God's oneness in the world is that no matter how badly people behave or how bad we're trying to take our individual lives offline, that behavior itself, paradoxically, pushes it back online. Again, let's get that part clear. It's not that you have to do something wrong and you get punished or pushed back into line. The oneness of Hashem's creation is that the very damage you do to the world itself is a self-correcting mechanism. Again, the irony or the paradox of people who misbehave, people who sin in the world, is that the sin itself, the rebellion against God itself, that itself brings the world to his ultimate fulfillment. Of course, there's pain on the way. Obviously, of course there is. But those who think that they can pervert their own history, their own perfection, and pervert this world's history, the irony is that they're playing right into the hands of a destiny that will make it happen. Again, not that something from left field happens to correct things. Your own activity operated in the world in such a way that it's a self-correcting mechanism. Although that's all hidden from us in this phase of history. So let me add an idea here that comes from the great Kabbalist, the Lashem. So, sorry, let me catch up on a couple of the comments. Someone is asking about global warming and the environmental destruction. We saw that, a nuclear plant was attacked yesterday in Ukraine. Yeah. So again, those are not options. That means that no matter how badly people go, no matter how badly we go offline, the system will bounce back and it'll correct itself. So you ask about global warming, for example. You know that there's not and seeing what's happening in Russia, there's enough nuclear arsenals to wipe off all life from the face of the planet. But that's not an option. That means that no matter how badly we behave and how badly people try to pervert the godly agenda, it'll play into the hands of asserting that godly agenda. And that'll be shown at the end of time. That's beyond our comprehension right now. So let me give you an insight from the Leshem. He says an amazing thing. Human ordeals. When people are really tested, the nature of the test is you don't know why God is doing things. So that's an amazing idea. So let me say that again from a different perspective. When God tests a righteous individual, like Abraham, for example, he doesn't only ask him for something courageous and for something to overcome his own personality. He asks him for something that he cannot understand. God asks Abraham to do something that he himself can't understand. So let's think about it. The first of the great ordeals that Abraham had to face. Okay, what was Abraham's first ordeal? Leave your birthplace, leave your home, leave your father's home, your country, and go. You'll see when you get there, but you can't know where you're headed. You may not know where you're headed. The ordeal is, the instruction is to leave home. That's totally clear. Where to? For that you're in the dark, Abraham. You can't know that. Part of an ordeal is that you're working in the dark. Again, the temptation is to think, God, where are you? That's the temptation. And let's now look at the 10th of his tests. Kill your own son. What's going on over here? Again, when God shows you what must be and asks you to find the courage to do it, that's one thing. But when God asks you to do something and you can't see where he's operating, right? Where he is, the thing is seemingly meaningless. It goes against everything you understand. You're totally in the dark. That's called an ordeal. Again, we live in a very weak generation. People feel abandoned very easily. But again, let me make this point, that the feeling of abandonment, not understanding what's going on, that is the heart of an ordeal. Okay, so this introduces the theme that when individual history progresses, we don't know why things are happening. Even in a prophetic era, by the way, Abraham obviously was a prophet, and that was kept from him as well. And let alone, all the more so, obviously, today for us, when we live in a post-prophetic era, when we see nothing. Right? We almost never see any directly meaningful hashgacha operating in the world, which of course is a safety mechanism as well, where you operate at seeing the divine hand, you're held to a very high standard, obviously. So that is the first axiom. God is hidden. You, God, are a God who hides. So that was said in the prophetic era, all the more so today. So let me give you a Torah source for this. I don't think that we're going to get through the 12 reasons that the Ramchal lays out, But let's do it maybe a little thoroughly rather than skim the surface, and let's see if we can approach this an idea or two a little bit more thoroughly. And I'll give you a classic source for the playing out of history and how it's hidden from us. So here's the source. Jacob, he's on his deathbed. His 12 sons are gathered around him, right? That is a cosmic moment in Jewish history is about to happen. He's about to leave the world and pass on his legacy to the tribes, right? Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they're the three great fathers. And now we move from fathers to tribes. 12. We're split now from one father with one wife. Next is 2, who are 4. And then we give over to 12. So this, again, this all needs... It's a deep discussion within itself. By the way, Yaakov himself is 2. Yaakov is both Yaakov and Yisrael. So he marries 2 women, Rachel and Leah. There are 2 persona in him, and that's manifested in 2 separate women. And the 2 women are full, Bilhah and Zilpah. And from there it becomes 12. And that's the foundation of the Jewish people. So this moment of giving over, that junctional point in history where the fathers are giving over to the children, and obviously there's a deep Kabbalistic principle that the moment of death, a person can see 2 worlds. On the day of death, from the transition point from this world to the next, a person's eyes are open to a higher world, which means there's a prophetic insight. There's a prophetic insight that a person can get at that moment. There's things that can be revealed in the world by a person going through that transition, which he could never reveal before, because he's got an eye or a foot in both worlds. So Yaakov's on the transitional borderline. So he's leaving this world and he's going into a different world. And as he's with his children and gives them each a blessing, which identifies the essence of each one of them, at that very moment, what does he try to do? He tries to reveal to them something amazing. He wanted to reveal to them the messianic endpoint in history. He wanted to reveal to them when Mashiach would come. In simple terms, that's what he wanted to do. I'll try to and explain it a little bit more deeply. He wanted to reveal to them when Mashiach would come. And as he was about to reveal it, it was taken from his mind. He was about to reveal that to them. At least that's the simple understanding. And as he was about to express it, so that the Jewish people would have known when history will end, that information got blocked off from him being able to share. So he realized his prophecy was being taken from him, and he thought that it must be that one of my children might not be perfect. He thought that the only reason why this is happening is because one of my children is obviously not perfect. Right? These 12 cosmic heroes, the 12 tribes standing around him at that point, the father figure is thinking, maybe I could reveal it, but he knew that they could not receive it. Why couldn't they receive it? Because one of them must manifest an imperfection. And he looked at each one, and he stated the essence of each one of them. That's the blessing. The blessing is your essence. That's the blessing. Right? What is the blessing he gave to each tribe? A definition of essence. There's no greater blessing in life than to know what your essence is. What the source of your soul is, and what you have to do in the world. Sorry, let me catch up on the comments and questions. Okay, good. Okay, question. Why did he want to reveal it? Why did he want to reveal it? Could you give your children a greater gift than that? Again, allowing them to function in the light. Explaining to somebody what their essence is, you're allowing them to know exactly how they should be operating in the world. Knowing where it will end, knowing where their journey will end, and seeing it all clearly. Again, I think that that's probably the greatest gift you could give somebody. So he looks at each one of his sons, and he sees that each one is perfect. So now there's only one conclusion in Yaakov's mind. That means they are able to reveal it. no imperfection in your own soul. You look at each one of them, no imperfection in any of them either. So then why is this hidden? So there's only one solution that Yaakov could come up with. He thinks that his son's unity is not perfect. Each one individually has reached their perfection, but they're not bonded into the unity that's the Jewish people. So he thought that that was an obstruction, and when they saw that reflected on Yaakov's face, when they saw that that's what their father thought, they all said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Israel, you, Yaakov, at the level of Yisrael, just as he is one in your heart, he's one in ours. And then Yaakov realized that when Mashiach would come, that was just hidden. Not because of an imperfection in him, not because of an imperfection in any of his sons, and not because of any lack of unity between them. This was a divine decision to hide it from him. And therefore, he was not able to reveal that information, and then he died. Now, let's understand this in a bit more of a sophisticated fashion. What was he trying to reveal? Again, it's childish to think that he was trying to reveal to them a date on the calendar. That's not what he was trying to do. Again, if there's one thing that we've all learned together, and frankly, one thing that Sandra and I have tried to do while we teach Torah to people, it's trying to improve upon, with regarding to teaching Torah, it's to show the subtlety and depth of Torah. We happen to live in a generation, again, of ridiculousness and childish superficiality, and one of the greatest pains of our generation is that the most subtle thing of all, which is Torah, is reduced to the most superficial and frankly fanatical, extreme one-dimensionality of all things in the world. And most people who study Torah give it less depth than any great work of literature which they know has subtlety. But when it comes to Torah, it's fanatical, or it's single-mindedness, or it's just simplicity. So let's understand that when it comes to the Torah, there's always subtlety beneath subtlety. And what he was trying to reveal to them, something a bit more sophisticated. He was trying to tell them, right? He wasn't trying to tell them a date on the calendar. Again, that's childish. He wanted to show them the reason for the date. He wanted to show them the meaning of Jewish history. He wanted to show them hashgacha, why things happen. The Ramchal says, in true Kabbalistic fashion, history progresses through the surface, but underneath the surface is a Kabbalistic spiritual process drawing the surface events to their conclusion. We don't see it. We don't see it. The Ramchal says an amazing thing. He says, the purpose of knowing Kabbalah is knowing why things happen in the world. The purpose of studying Kabbalah, by the way, this is a huge argument amongst the Kabbalists. The great Leshem argues very strongly against the Ramchal on this, violently against this. He says that that's not the purpose of learning Kabbalah. The purpose of learning Kabbalah is to know what the spiritual world is in and of itself, not to know how it applies itself in this world. And it's a major, major argument between them. But let's take the Ramchal's view for now. He says that when you learn Kabbalah, you know why things happen. You see the hidden hand moving things behind the scenes. That's the purpose of learning Kabbalah. That's the practical output of learning Kabbalah. So it's not just spiritual ideas. That's not what Kabbalah is. It's to see what is governing and leading history. And therefore, what Yaakov wanted to reveal to his sons wasn't a date on the calendar. That's not the point. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to show them the meaning of history itself. Had he revealed that to them, any event in every individual life, every single tragedy, any national joy would have been seen as a building block in the messianic perfection. Can you imagine that? History would have been illuminated instead of being obstructed. Again, we live in an obstructed history. We don't see God's hand anywhere. All we see is meaningless. We don't understand, and in our individual lives, we certainly don't understand. Yeah, of course, yeah, I'm going to explain this, yes. And nationally also, we don't know why things happen. Had we lived in a world where Yaakov explained this, we would be living in a world where we can understand why each thing happens, why there's a Holocaust situation against the Jewish people. You'd see the reason clearly. You'd know exactly why everything, including all the nuances of history, were happening. When a young person dies, you'd see the Gilgul. You'd see who that soul was in a previous life and why it needed to live in this life that exact amount of time. You'd be living in an illuminated world. Can you imagine the ecstasy, by the way, of moving through life and seeing things, right, as they happen and knowing why they happen? Why did God hide that? Why did God remove that? Why did Hashem remove that vision from Yaakov's mind and force him to leave his sons in the world operating from a place of darkness? Why did he do that? So there's a very interesting idea over here. Very interesting idea. I think that this was first expressed by Rav Hutner, is what I heard. So listen to what he said. Revealing the meaning of history, that's called Yediyah, divine knowledge. Not revealing it, where you make things happen, right? Where you make things happen, that's called Bechira, free will. So there's a classic tension between foreknowledge and free will. God's foreknowledge sees everything, and yet doesn't close out your options. God sees that you'll go left and not right. Yet you're free to go right anyway. You won't go right. You'll go left because that's what he saw. But you have the freedom of will. Again, the greatest mystery in all of Hashgacha in the world is how God can know what you will do in advance, and yet you can be free to do whatever it is that you'd like. Again, we live in that paradox. We know, as the Rambam says, that this is beyond human understanding. We can't understand how God can see what will happen, and yet you're still free to make it happen anyway. As if to say you can go against what he sees. So this is something beyond our human understanding. Yaakov wanted to resolve that issue for his children. He wanted to show them where things were going, divine foreknowledge. He wanted to show them history in advance and the meaning of every historical event, and yet trust them, even though they would have seen everything and Yaakov would have explained everything. Yaakov still would have then trusted them to use their free will fully in the world. And God said that they're not capable of doing that. You, Yaakov, at this point in your life, about transition from this world to another world, you're living at a level where you can see what must be in the world and work fully to make it happen. But your children, they're not quite at that level. Those 12 cosmic figures, the roots of the Jewish people, if they operate in a world where they're responsible to make a thing happen that they see must happen anyway, it'll weaken the world. It'll weaken their work in the world. So let me try to make this a little clearer. Imagine that you have to build something, okay? Imagine that you have to work really, really, really hard at building something. You have to exert yourself with a tremendous amount of extreme exertion. And every fiber of your being has to operate to get this thing built or constructed. And you invest yourself because it totally rests on your shoulders exclusively. How hard would you work if you saw that it was going to happen anyway? No matter what you do, whether you worked hard or didn't work on it at all, it's going to get done anyway. How hard would you work? Again, you've been given a responsibility to build this structure, and you carry all the logs and the rocks or whatever material you need, and you're building this structure, and it's very important, and you're working to an extreme degree. How hard would you actually work if you knew fully that if you laid down on a hammock under a tree in the shade, that it would happen anyway? How motivated would you be to do the work? You would have to be an incredible human being to put the same effort knowing that your efforts are irrelevant. And God said to him, they're not at that level, Yaakov. You, Yaakov, are living at a level where you can live the contradiction between Bechira and Yediah. You can live in a world where you can see that it must be, where all things will come to their perfection, and yet make it happen with full responsibility. They need to operate in a world where it's not obvious. We need to operate in a world where we have a semblance of making it happen. We can see that it's dependent on our work. And as an emunah in the background, we know that it's not dependent on our work. But we can't see it clearly. And therefore, the guiding hand of history, that's been hidden from us. So the first principle we studied, now I know that some of you may not enjoy this because you want to hear a class on why things happen and find out why things happen. And I'm telling you in this class that you won't know why things happen. I don't mean to upset you or depress you. Sorry, let me get a couple of the comments in. Yeah. On a maximum participation, again, that is of extreme importance for sure. The fact that God has got it all worked out and it's going to happen anyway, that is completely irrelevant. The world is being run on your effort and your participation. And it has to be that way. And you have to invest yourself in it fully. And therefore, this is how it has to be. So things are more hidden and things are less hidden. In a prophetic era, things are much less hidden than they are today. Our sources are clear on this. If you lived in an era of prophecy, which ended about 2,400 years ago, you went to a prophet and you asked him, "Prophet, why am I sick?" And he would tell you the spiritual reason for being sick. "Mr. Prophet, where are my keys?" He'd show you where your keys are. The hidden things would have been revealed. But we live in a world where there's no access to prophecy anymore. Therefore, we live in a double darkness where we have no access to knowing. When someone gets ill today, we don't know why they're sick. We don't know. Again, we have 12 reasons. We can go through the 12 reasons. We can suppose which one of them it might be. You can do that. And on some maybe rare circumstances, we can identify the cause. But the general principle is we move through history without knowing why. Let's just get this part clear. If you would like to hear a particularly immature comments, you know why we're having a COVID epidemic, right? Again, I'm saying immature reasons. You know why we're having a COVID epidemic? It's because whatever Lashon Hara. It's because women don't dress modestly enough. It's because whatever. If you hear people say that, that is absolute garbage. Garbage. God does not reveal these things to us. So let's not get this confused. We know when there is an epidemic, God is not happy with the world. The Talmud says that very clearly. If you've been listening to Shiurim when COVID first started, everybody was talking about Bava Kama, the tractate, one of the books in the Talmud, page Daf Samech. When a plague occurs in the world, it's because of human misbehavior. So that's clear, that's fine. But the exact details, why now, and which aspect of human misbehavior, we don't know that. We don't know. And therefore, when you go to see a Kabbalist, and he tells you that this happened to you because this, and you did that, or you did this, or some charlatan is going to read your Kabbalistic tea leaves, or read your palm, or read your damaged mezuzahs, and tell you why this happened in your family, that is garbage. Garbage. We don't know the reasons why. There are rare occasions where we can know, and we need to explain that. There are rare and very seldom occurrences where things happen in your life and they're directly related. So let me give you a couple examples of those. When Rabbi Moshe Feinstein died, I heard this story a long time ago from one of my rabbis. When Rabbi Feinstein died, he was walking with the people, right? With the tens of thousands of people who were at the funeral on that very sad day, and this rabbi had the privilege of walking next to the great Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, and it was a long 2-hour walk. And the rabbi asked Rabbi Shapiro, "How do we know why things happen?" Right? Or sorry, can we know why things happen? And he told him, no, we can't know why things happen, except on some rare occasions where something happens in your life where you can see clearly that this is happening because of that. Right? For example, if you speak Lashon Hara and 2 minutes later you get a blister on your tongue and can't speak for the day, maybe that's pretty clear. If it's that connected, you can make the connection. And by the way, you'd be very ungrateful and insensitive not to make that connection. But again, that happens pretty rarely. God hides himself, so you can have an occasional flash of light coming through the clouds. That could happen, but it won't happen routinely because we don't live in a prophetic era. And that's why the Talmud says, something bad happens to you. Do you know exactly why it's happening? If it's absolutely crystal clear, then you could take the message. The Talmud says that if you can't find the reason because it's hidden from you, as it usually is, then you go through your life in layers. What needs fixing? Something's happened that's distressing, for example. So what needs fixing in my life? Will it be directly related to that thing? No, not necessarily, but fix what needs to be fixed. And if you can't find what needs to be fixed, then you do Torah learning, then you study Torah. Leave it to your Torah study, because that's the great basis. So let me put it to you this way. Going to Rav Moshe's funeral, there were no cars allowed in that area. But Rav Simcha Wasserman, he was an elderly Torah giant, and his doctor was allowed to drive him. And his doctor happened to be this rabbi's brother-in-law, and this rabbi was in the car with them. And they were in the car, and they were surrounded, obviously, by hundreds of thousands of people who went to Rav Moshe's funeral. And on the way to the burial, there was a yeshiva student, a young man, and he was crying. And he put his head inside the window when he saw Rabbi Wasserman, and he said, "Rebbe, why?" What did he mean by that? He meant, why did Rav Moshe and the other Torah giant amongst American Jewry, Rav Kamenetsky, why did they die within a few days of each other? Why were we bereft of two Torah giants within a matter of days of one another? And Rav Wasserman said to him, "We don't know why things happen, but we know they happen for a reason. And therefore, we seek what needs to be corrected. We seek the treatment. We seek the healing that must be used at this particular point in time." And he said, in this case, it happens to be Torah. 2 Torah sages of the generation died. And here's what he said to him. Listen to this. Rav Simcha said to the yeshiva student, when a patient has an infection and the doctor doesn't know what infection he may have, the doctor prescribes a broad spectrum antibiotic. You don't know which infection it is. If you knew which infection it was, you would know which antibiotic to prescribe. But you don't know which infection, so you use a broad spectrum antibody that covers many infections, right? As many infections as possible. Torah is a broad spectrum antibody of the Jewish people. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? So I learned from that there are limits to interpreting why things happen. Again, we just don't know. And that's because we're living in a post-prophetic era. We don't live in an era where God is revealing himself openly. It's a great privilege for God to speak to you directly. You do something and God speaks to you directly, who do you think you are to be spoken to directly? Who do you think you are that when you make a misstep in life, God's going to reach down and say, excuse me, and tap you on your shoulder? You need to be very grateful for that. You need to be very grateful for that. And therefore, rarely in your life, very occasionally in your life, where God does speak to you directly, meaning you do something and there's an immediate, obvious response in that area, like the Lashon Hara example we gave before, with your tongue getting a blister. That's a tremendous privilege when that happens. But if that's not the way, then you know it's meant to be, and you look for what needs to be corrected. And that's what you need to do. When Ramosha Shapiro's daughter passed away, she was only 15 years old. She was an amazing girl. Just before she died, she took her father to the side, and she said, Abba, I don't want you to worry. I know for sure I'm going to a better place than this. And therefore, there's no reason for you to be distressed. The day she died, she went to school. She couldn't breathe anymore. She said, there's no point staying home. If I can't breathe, I may as well not breathe at school. And that was the day she died. She was a 15-year-old, unbelievable girl. And when she died, Ramosha was sitting on the floor. He was in mourning. And he gave a description of his daughter at the Shiva house through his tears. And after a long pause, he said some people take 70 years to do their work in the world. And some people only take 15 years to do their work in the world. Okay, now, do we know why it had to be her and not another girl? No. But we know it's for a reason. It's childish, immature, and mistaken to try to identify the particular reason in an imaginative fashion. Again, when it happens clearly, and the message is clear, and that's why God is not talking to us right now. But we always know it's moving to a final showdown. One reason why things happen in the world is reward and punishment. Although the main concept of reward and punishment appears in another world, applies in two other worlds. Olam HaNeshamot, that's the world of souls after death, and the final world, which is Olam Haba, after the world of souls. Again, there's three phases. There's this life. To be accurate, actually, there are four phases. There's this life, and things happen in this world for a reason. There's the life after death called Olam HaNeshamot, the soul world. There's a reincarnation where the soul is put back into the world again, into this world again, into a body. And then there's the final Olam Haba, which is the final absolute reward. Except obviously for those few who are annihilated from the world, which the Ramchal discusses in Derech Hashem as well. Right, so just how bad do you have to be annihilated from that world and all the self-corrected mechanisms that prevent that from happening? So the first concept is reward and punishment. And therefore, a person can reap the reward even in this world. Okay, so there are certain things which are rewarded in this world and in the next world. And there are certain things which are either punished in this world or the next world. So let's begin with the simplest of all, the most obvious. The Ramchal devotes, I think, a whole chapter to this, namely the concept of reward and punishment. Now, you don't know when something happens if it's a reward. Maybe it's an opportunity. And sometimes a reward can be a punishment as well. For example, when good things happen to a wicked person, genuinely good things, genuine payouts for what he's done that's good, even though he's a wicked person, that's reward. But that's a disaster. It's a disaster that he's being paid in this world because he doesn't deserve that reward in an infinite world. Let me explain that. Let's at least get the principle clear. This is one of the most important things to understand. We definitely won't be covering all 12 reasons, but you could obviously, I recommend that you all look it up for yourselves in Derech Hashem and see how he goes through each one in detail. So let's at least get this principle clear. Sometimes a good person suffers in this world. Questions of the unknown. Why do some righteous people suffer? Why do some of these particular righteous suffer and other righteous people don't suffer? Why do the wicked prosper, and why do some particular wicked people prosper and other wicked people don't prosper? Again, both versions of the question are classic questions. One obvious simplistic answer is so that there's free will. That's a very simple, basic answer. If every righteous person only had good deals and every wicked person had a punishment coming their way, you wouldn't have too much free will. Okay, however, despite that, there is still the question of justice and fairness. So here's a good person suffering. The question is why? And here's a wicked person prospering. Why? So let me give you the simplest of all the answers, which the Ramchal alludes to over here and also deals with. When a righteous person suffers in the world, one possible reason, again, it's always one of the 12 reasons. Which one, we don't know. And sometimes, by the way, it's more than one reason. And the Ramchal explains that as well. Sometimes there are opposing forces in the world. Sometimes a person needs to be rich for a certain reason. For example, his parents are rich. That's the reason why a child should be rich. So he explains that. And yet, this same individual needs to also be poor. Those are conflicting motivations, conflicting spiritual courses, if you will. He needs to be rich because the family needs wealth. But this individual happens to need to be poor. He needs to be poor. The Ramchal goes into that. He goes into the fact that God has to make, again, a weighing up of opposing spiritual reasons. He explains all of that. But one of the reasons a righteous person can suffer in this world is because God wants him to be perfected in the next world. And so he gives him suffering in this world to pay him out for all of his sins in this world. After all, even the most righteous person has done things which are wrong, and God doesn't want him or her to suffer in the world of eternity. So God gives this righteous person suffering in this world, so that when he enters that clarified state of an absolute world, he's totally pure and clean. And therefore, he pays. He may have 1% of sin and 99% righteousness, but 1% of his life was sinful. So God pays him out severely in this world. Again, could be extremely severe. Why? So that when this person dies, his accounts are clear. And he lives in a world of eternity with no suffering necessary. It's an unbelievable privilege to do that. Believe me, it's much better to suffer in this world than in that world. It's a tremendous kindness when God causes people to suffer in this world rather than in the world where one cannot correct themselves. Conversely, you have a wicked person. Wickedness, 99% mayhem, crime, chaos. But he's done some good things. He's done 1 or 2 mitzvahs. God pays him for that too. It's an absolute accounting. God must pay him for the mitzvahs that he performed. Where is God going to pay the wicked person? Quite often he pays him out here. That is a disaster. He gives him wealth, happiness, children, good health for his whole family, whatever he wants. He's given a free hand in this world. That's a disaster. This is not dishonest. He's being paid. He deserves a reward. He did one mitzvah. He deserves to be paid for that mitzvah. One mitzvah is worth an unbelievable, incomprehensible amount. God gives him millions, maybe even billions. Whatever he wants in this world. Health, happiness, long life in this world. Whatever he wants. But that's an unmitigated disaster. When that person leaves this world, he has nothing. He's been paid out in full in this world. So think about that for a moment. How is that fair? This reminds me, there were two infamous brothers who lived in Europe, and they were criminals. There was a book written about them. The book might be called At Least He Was Nice to His Mother. Anyways, he was obviously a very nice person to his mother. And he was heartless, a cruel criminal, but he was very nice to his own mother. And that was genuine. And he needs to be paid for that. And therefore, this person who's 99% wicked, God pays him richly for his 1% of mitzvahs. Now, here's the question. Stay with me. This is an amazing thing to understand. You know why reward for mitzvahs are generally paid in the next world and not in this world? Do you know the reason for that? The Talmud has a famous expression. It says a reward for a mitzvah is not paid in this world. There's no reward for a mitzvah in this world. There are exceptions, as I mentioned, but the general principle is that reward for commandments, for fulfilling the divine will, is not given in this world. You know what the deep reason is for that? Because this world isn't big enough. Let me explain what I mean. This is an amazing concept to understand. The reason why God doesn't give reward in this world, it's not only because he wants things to remain hidden, right? And so we all have free will. It's because this world just isn't big enough. A mitzvah is a contact with infinity. A mitzvah means bonding. The Hebrew word for mitzvah, from the root tzavta, meaning a bond. A mitzvah bonds you with infinity. It connects you with God. And therefore, the reward for a mitzvah, that's why when the Vilna Gaon was on his deathbed, he was crying. And he said to his students, this world that he's leaving, it's so beautiful. That for a few pennies you can fulfill a mitzvah. A mitzvah has infinite value. It's completely transfinite. God can't pay you for a mitzvah in this world because the world's not big enough. Mitzvahs are contacts with infinity. Most of us here, right, who live in Los Angeles, right, we're familiar with Los Angeles. Imagine that you're driving your car from LA to Vegas. And if you don't live in LA, I'm sure you could imagine this. Imagine you're driving from LA to Vegas. And in your pocket, you have a check written to you for $1 million. And as you're driving, you drive through, there are a couple small towns as you drive from LA to Vegas. And you stop in one of the small towns in the middle of the desert. Right? You know the kind of town I'm talking about? It's got one building, right? It's the gas station, and it's the post office, and it's the jail. It's all those things in one. You pull in and you want a Coke. A nice cold drink. But the only money you've got is the $1 million check in your pocket. So you ask the guy to cash it for you. The guy faints. He's never seen that much money in his life. You don't get your Coke. The place isn't big enough to cash your check. All the money in town isn't close to being enough cash to cash your check. You can't cash your check in this world. When you get down to Vegas, you can go to any bank. You can go to any bank. Pull out your check for $1 million, and they'll cash it for you, no problem. They'll cash it without a blink of an eye. They do that all the time in the big cities. When you travel through this world, and you have a mitzvah in your pocket, this place isn't big enough to cash it. God doesn't pay out a reward for mitzvahs in this world because mitzvahs are worth infinity. Therefore, he pays you in the world of infinity. And that's the reason mitzvahs are not paid out here in this world. Now let's continue the account. So here's a wicked person. Please listen carefully. It is amazing to understand this. Here's a wicked person, and he's done a mitzvah. He had matzah on Pesach, or he was nice to his mom. God pays him in this world. And the question is, how unfair is that? He did a genuine mitzvah, and God pays him in this world? Yeah. He gives him millions, billions, yachts on the Caribbean, villas in France, whatever else he wants. God gives him all of it. But that's not real value. That's not enough. All the wealth in this world is nothing compared to the infinite value of what a singular mitzvah is. This place isn't big enough. And he has a real mitzvah. Isn't that unfair that God gives him reward in this world? So I want you to see the question. Again, it's a deep question. The person did a mitzvah. A mitzvah, by definition, is a piece of infinity. And God owes him that piece of infinity. And what's God paying him? Nothing. Peanuts. He's giving him a few million or $1 billion. Who cares about that? That's God in a flash. And here's the answer. Here's the answer. This person doesn't live in that world. He only lives in this world. And he only lives in this dimension. So his mitzvahs only have this dimension attached to them. Again, the mitzvahs are worth infinity, but they have to be invested there. A mitzvah has to be done because you live in another world. This person doesn't live in another world. He's a wicked person, and he lives only in this world. Therefore, everything he does is limited to the proportion of this world. If you want to get a dividend in a bank account, you have to open the account. You have to open an account. That's why the Rambam says anyone has a share in the world to come. Jew or non-Jew. Jew or non-Jew has a share in the world to come on condition that he does what's right in this world. Not because it's good and right, but because it was commanded in a Torah given at Sinai, coming from another world. Let's say that again. You're a non-Jew. Do you have a share in the world to come? Of course you do. According to the Rambam, for sure. But it's on condition. On condition. What's the condition? You do what's right and good in this world. Not for this world. If you do what's right and good in this world, then you do what's right and good. It makes the world a better place, and you benefit, but you don't get an existence in another world when you only are focused on improving this world for the sake of this world. You want an existence in another world? You'll have to invest in it. You need to open an account if you want to get paid a dividend. A person who wants a reward in the next world has to have a connection to it. So if a non-Jew operates in this world, and he does the 7 categories of law, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws in this world, because they're commanded by a supreme transcendental God, in a Torah given from a different world, then he's invested in that world, and that non-Jewish person has a share in that world. A wicked person, by definition, is only interested in this world. He's not a godly person. He doesn't have a God conscious. His head doesn't extend into that world. God would love to give him a mitzvah of infinite value, but he's not there. He never opened an account. And therefore, the best that God can do for him is give him everything in this world. So you get some, multi-million-dollar yachts, but that's where he lives. Reward is earned. It doesn't come from something external. Reward of a mitzvah is what you build in the mitzvah. And this person has built his world as this world only. He never opened the account. Reward isn't something that's given out illogically. Reward is what you generate. It's an actualization of self. This person has only actualized self in this worldly context. And therefore his mitzvahs are only of worth here because he's never opened an account anywhere else, in another place. Again, I hope that you see the logic of this. Okay, so we begun to scratch the surface. Let's make a quick summary. We said that everything happens in the world for a reason, but the reasons are hidden. Even in a prophetic era, they're generally hidden. Even Yaakov's sons can't operate in that world. going through history, seeing the endpoint clearly, seeing how everything operates and what it means, and yet trying to make it happen. And now we live in a generation where by definition we cannot see. And therefore, when somebody has an illness, we don't know why. We can look into the 12 reasons and see the possibilities, right, in general. But if it's a punishment, we don't know for which particular sin. Torah insight could go a long way to explaining what are the likely possibilities, and could go a long way explaining what it is that may need to be corrected. But don't be superstitious and foolish that you go and have your palm or ground coffee beans read or whatever, and now you think that you'll know why things are happening in the world. There's only one thing worse than that. It's to go have your palm read to know what will happen tomorrow. That's completely out of the question. Completely out of the question. It's theoretically possible to have an insight as to why something has happened in the past. Why not? That's fine. You can see connections. That's possible. But God doesn't show us the future. That's called prophecy. And that we don't have today. All right, so we obviously didn't get through all of the principles. We only touched on a few. And I hope that this was an interesting introduction into this obviously very deep topic. So anyways, I've gone over time. I'm very sorry about that. I beg your forgiveness. But I want to wish you all a wonderful Shabbat, and hope to see you all next week.